There's a tradition that exists in certain faith communities which asserts that Moses received the law of God on Mount Sinai during the day of Pentecost. This video sets out to prove and clarify that assertion by using the ancient Hebraic book of Jubilees as the ultimate proof for this claim. If you like my content here at Hanging on His Words, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and dropping a comment in the comment section below. On to the video. From the earliest chapters of the book of Exodus, we can read about how Yahweh wanted to lead his people Israel out from under the oppressive rule of the Egyptians and into the Sinaitic wilderness, to where Horeb, one of his 4 holy mountains, is located. But why did he want Moses to lead them into the wilderness? Exodus 5:1 says, "And afterward, Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, 'Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, let my people go, so that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness.'" Yahweh was interested in his people celebrating a feast to him. But what feast was he calling them to? Let's find out. Exodus 12:1-2 says, "Now Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, 'This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you.'" I'm going to be using my template for 2024's creation solar calendar as a visual guide moving forward in this video. Yahweh told the congregation of Israel that the month that Passover and unleavened bread are in is to be the first month of their calendar year. After the event of the Passover, which took place on the 14th day in the evening of this month, the Israelites were permitted to leave their houses in the morning of the first day of unleavened bread, on the 15th. This is when they began their mass exodus out of Egypt. As we progress through the Exodus timeline of events, the Israelites were pursued by Pharaoh and his army. They then crossed the Red Sea on dry land, followed by a bunch of complaining about not having anything to eat or drink, and Yahweh remedying their complaints with sustenance, to fighting against the Amalekites. Then they made up with Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, who came from the land of Midian, and in the 3rd month, after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on this day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Israel approaches the wilderness of Sinai, where they were to celebrate a feast to Yahweh. Exodus 19 verse 1 says that the Israelites entered into the wilderness in the 3rd month after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. Remember, the Israelites left Egypt on the 15th day of month 1. Now we're at month 3. As you can see, the text says, "on this day," which can be a little ambiguous. This day doesn't tell us what this was. It could have been any day of the 3rd month. However, I will show you that Israel had to have arrived in the wilderness at least before or on the 13th day of month 3. As Israel starts to settle in at the base of Mount Sinai, Moses goes up the mountain to converse with God. Some back and forth exchanges take place between God and the elders of Israel through the mediation of Moses, resulting in the people agreeing to keep covenant with Yahweh. Then in Exodus 19 verses 10-11, Yahweh also said to Moses, "Go to the people and set them apart as holy today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the 3rd day. For on the 3rd day, Yahweh will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." Moses goes back down the mountain and tells the people exactly what Yahweh had instructed them to do. Yahweh tells them to set themselves apart today, which I believe was on the 13th, tomorrow, which would be the 14th, and that on the 3rd day, he himself would literally descend upon the mountain for all the people to witness. Exodus 19:16-8 says, "So it happened on the 3rd day, when it was morning, that there were thunder and lightning flashes, and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud trumpet sound, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, because Yahweh descended upon it in fire. And its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently, The third day, as we'll see, was on the 15th day of month 3. Yahweh showed up bright and early on this day to present themselves before his people. If it truly was the 15th, then it would have been on this multi-titled feast day, known as the Feast of Weeks, First Fruits, Harvest, and later in the Greek, Pentecost. Yahweh spent a good portion of this 15th day providing instruction to Moses about several of the commandments contained in his law, that would then be passed on to the people of Israel. Then in Exodus 24 verse 1, Yahweh tells Moses to gather his brother Aaron, his nephews Nadab and Abihu, as well as 70 of Israel's elders, so that they can all come up the mountain to worship him at a safe distance. Keep in mind that this invitation was made on the same 15th day of the month, but as we'll read in the text, said meeting didn't come to fruition until the following day. And Moses wrote down all the words of Yahweh. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. This single verse in Exodus 24, in my opinion, is the clincher to support the argument that I'm trying to make. You'll see why shortly. Verse 4 says that Moses rose up early the next morning, which puts this morning on the 16th day of month 3, the day after the aforementioned feast. The text states that during this 16th day, the sons of Israel made burnt offerings and sacrifices as peace offerings to Yahweh. Then a few verses later, the narrative shifts to the fulfillment of Yahweh's previous invitation that he made the day before regarding Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel coming up the mountain to worship him through the participation of a meal. Exodus 24:9-11 says, And Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders of Israel went up. And they saw the place where the God of Israel stood, and what was under his feet was just like brickwork of lapis lazuli, and like the appearance of the firmament of the heavens in purity. And not even one of the chosen leaders of Israel was missing. And they appeared in the place of God, and they ate and drank. After the completion of this covenant meal, now Yahweh said to Moses, Come up to me on the mountain, and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction. So Moses arose with Joshua his attendant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. But to the elders he said, Remain here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a legal matter, let him approach them. Then Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. And the glory of Yahweh dwelt on Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the 7th day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of Yahweh was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop, in the eyes of the sons of Israel. Then Moses entered the midst of the cloud, as he went up to the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. As you can hopefully tell, there were certain levels to this particular mountain. The elders were allowed to come up to a certain level of Mount Sinai, and now we read about Yahweh beckoning for Moses to continue his ascent to an even higher portion of the mountain, to where his glory cloud rested. Both Moses and Joshua make the ascent. Moses tells the elders to remain at the level of the mountain where they had just consumed their covenant meal until he and Joshua returned to them. The text doesn't say that Joshua had the same experience as Moses did with regards to him entering the midst of the cloud on the 7th day. I think the implication is that Joshua stayed his distance outside of the cloud and waited there until Moses came back out. Another point of interest in this timeline of events is that the scriptures say that Yahweh's glory cloud dwelt on the top of Mount Sinai for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, he invited Moses to step into his cloud. The cloud of Yahweh's glory came down upon the mountain back on the 15th day. It stayed there from the 15th to the 21st. It was on the 7th day, which again was on the 21st, that Yahweh instructed Moses to step in. It's at this juncture where we're going to backtrack ever so slightly by reading a parallel passage out of the book of Jubilees. There is one detail in the following passage that cements my argument and proves the importance of the clincher verse back in Exodus 24:4. Jubilees 1:1-4 says, And it came to pass in the first year of the exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt, in the 3rd month, on the 16th day of the month, that God spake to Moses, saying, Come up to me on the mount, and I will give you 2 tables of stone, of the law and of the commandment, which I have written, that you may teach them. And Moses went up into the mount of God, and the glory of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai. and a cloud overshadowed it 6 days. And he called to Moses on the 7th day out of the midst of the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a flaming fire on the top of the mount. And Moses was on the mount 40 days and 40 nights. And God taught him the earlier and the latter history of the division of all the days of the law and of the testimony. As you can see, the contextual timeline and setting for where and when the book of Jubilees was written is directly tied to the same event of Exodus 24, verses 12 to 28, when Moses made his way up the mountain to step into Yahweh's glory cloud for 40 days and nights. The very first verse of Jubilees asserts that it was indeed on the 16th day of month 3 that Yahweh called for Moses to come up to him, which lines up perfectly with the timing of all the previous passages I presented. Without Jubilees 1:1 informing us of a very specific detail in relation to when Moses was called up the mountain, everything else I presented prior would just be timeline speculation. 5 chapters later in the book of Jubilees, the angels inform Moses that, for this reason, it is ordained and written on the heavenly tablets that they should celebrate the Feast of Weeks in this month once a year, to renew the covenant every year. And this whole festival was celebrated in heaven from the day of creation until the days of Noah, 26 Jubilees and 5 weeks of years. And Noah and his sons observed it for 7 Jubilees and 1 week of years, until the day of Noah's death. And from the day of Noah's death, his sons did away with it until the days of Abraham, and they ate blood. But Abraham observed it, and Isaac and Jacob and his children observed it up to your days. And in your days, the children of Israel forgot it, until you celebrated it anew on this mount. And do you command the children of Israel to observe this festival in all their generations for a commandment unto them? 1 day in the year in this month they shall celebrate the festival. For it is the feast of weeks, and the feast of firstfruits. This feast is twofold, and of a double nature. According to what is written and engraven concerning it, celebrate it. For I have written in the book of the first law, in that which I have written for you, that you should celebrate it in its season, 1 day in the year. And I explained to you its sacrifices that the children of Israel should remember and should celebrate it throughout their generations in this month, 1 day in every year. It's incredible what we learn about this feast in the book of Jubilees. The angels celebrated it in heaven from the beginning of creation. Then Noah was instructed to keep it. After Noah died, and went into hibernation until Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob began to observe it. Then in the life of Moses, the children of Israel forgot about it until it was celebrated once again on the mountain where Yahweh came down with his angels. This festival is a combination of 2 celebrations, Shavuot and First Fruits, also known as the Feast of the Harvest, the Feast of Weeks, and the Day of Pentecost. This festivity represented the renewal of God's covenant with his righteous people once a year. One thing I want to point out before wrapping up with the last passage of this video is that the giving of God's law wasn't simply a 1-day ordeal. It didn't all take place on this renewed Feast of Pentecost. As you can see, the communication process took place over a series of several days. Yes, Yahweh started to instruct Moses about his law on the 15th day of the 3rd month, when he first came down in jaw-dropping fashion. But let's not forget that Moses also went up the mountain for a period of 40 days, twice, to receive the commandments of God. To give you a visual for that lapse of time, Moses went all the way up the mountain on the 16th, stayed there until he was given access to the glory cloud on the 21st, which was a Sabbath. And then 40 days later, he stepped out of the glory cloud at the end of the 40th day, which would have landed him on the first day of month 5. Now on to Acts chapter 2. And when the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues like fire, distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit was giving them utterance. What I love about this event that occurred several hundred years after Yahweh descended to Mount Sinai on the renewed Feast of Pentecost is how Luke describes what took place. A violent noise of rushing wind descended from heaven, filling the house, and like manner to how Yahweh descended on the mount, filling the mountain. tongues like fire appearing on the gathered believers in the midst of the rushing wind. Yahweh came down from heaven, cloaked in fire, on Mount Sinai. It's all intentional. Yahweh's feast days are important. Relevant occurrences take place on these very special, set-apart days. So enjoy celebrating them, because your spiritual family above celebrates them with you. I hope that this study assisted you in getting a better understanding about the importance of Pentecost, and how neglected books like Jubilees help bring clarity and context to the greater narrative of God's character and plan of redemption. Remember to love God, and to love your neighbor. Maranatha.